In this video, I will provide an in-depth overview and analysis of my final Battlefield 5 settings in 2025. I fully understand there is never one specific setup for all, as most settings such as sensitivity and field of view are all personal preference and all types of settings can work for anyone. But here are the best settings that work for me, of which I am a very low sense and low FOV player. Absolutely, this is not the norm of high sense, high FOV that you may be used to seeing high skill players use, but I've more than proven that it works by, for example, getting 100 kills with every primary gun in Battlefield 5 Conquest, which no one else has managed to do since the launch of the game. So let's look at my settings, explain why I use what I use, but also explain how you can change it depending on your playstyle. Timestamps are in the description. And lastly, just before I get into the settings, in terms of how this is going to work, I will show every single setting on screen that I use, so you can pause it and read it without needing any explanation if you want. However, the ones I do explain will be the ones which I think are the most important. Otherwise, I'll just skip over them if I don't think it's that important. So let's get straight into the first, which is going to be the control settings. Starting off with the sensitivities, you can see my soldier aim and zoom aim sensitivity is at 20% and 80% respectively, which is very low and lower than the default settings. Generally, I have a belief, or rather it's a fact, that Battlefield maps are very large and larger than most of the FPS games. However, long range ability is something that I think is very important, especially in Battlefield, because you might see 50, 100, 200 enemies across the course of a game. However, how good you are at long range determines how many of those potential enemies you see you could actually kill. If you're always a close range aggressive player only using a medic SMG, you might see 200 of those enemies across the course of a game, but you might actually only be able to kill 80 of them. So therefore, long range ability is absolutely key, and that's why I have low sensitivity, because the low sensitivity allows me to be more, I have more freedom in that when I'm tracking a target at distance, I don't have to be so careful as to how much I touch the thumbstick. I can do very large inputs on the thumbstick and get minimal movement on the screen, which allows me to be more accurate and careful and track targets a longer distance, whereas someone on a higher sensitivity has to be a lot more careful and has a lot more room for error when aiming at those targets in the distance. Now, of course, this means that it is harder for me to be fast and quick when at close range. However, this is one of those settings which with time and practice and experience you can master both long range or close range, whether you're playing on high sensitivity or low sensitivity. But generally, I believe that for my consistency across hours of games, years of games, whatever, low sensitivity is just, that's what I find is the best for long distance, and I've been able to come good at close range as well. Yes, I can't run around and jump around a corner and turn at the same time as good as someone on low sensitivity, but your game adapts as you play more on low sensitivity. You'll start turning into a corner rather than going around or jumping around a corner and then turning. So that's why I play on low sensitivity, and it benefits me massively. Double tap to sprint slide is the next one to talk about, which is halfway down the screen there, of which I've got it on. Having it on, of course, means yes, I've got to press the button twice. However, having it off is going to restrict your movement in that you can't go straight from a sprint into a crouch sprint. So if you've got it off when you're sprinting and you press the button once, you're going to activate a slide rather than a crouch sprint. And I think the crouch sprint is very important, especially if you're on low health, near cover, and want to run and get away from an enemy who is pushing you. You can more quickly go straight from a sprint into a crouch sprint to get away from the enemy, get to cover, to heal up, and to fight back. If you've got this off, and therefore will activate a slide when you want to crouch while sprinting, then there's a higher chance in that scenario that you're going to die. And of course, if you do want to do a crouch sprint when you've got this the setting off, then you've effectively got to do an extra few button presses again, because you're going to be sprinting. You'll have to come to a standstill, then you'll have to crouch, and then you'll have to sprint while crouched, rather than, of course, if you've got this on, simply just pressing crouch while you're sprinting. So I prefer to have this on, but again, either can work depending on personal preference. A massive one here is going to be the soldier leaning, which you can see I've got on toggle rather than hold. Now this is very important that I've got it on toggle, especially when using the default settings for leaning in Battlefield 5, which is going to be done and activated using both of my thumbsticks. The left thumbstick is going to be used to determine whether I want to lean left or to the right. So if I want to lean to the left, I will move my left thumbstick slightly to the left or to the right, obviously if I want to go to the right, with the right thumbstick acting as the activation. So when I'm moving to the left, I will then press down the right thumbstick to activate the lean, and vice versa if I want to go the opposite way. Now, some people would argue that leaning is much better on the bumpers, or even if you've got back paddles, some people like to put leaning on there. I have tried that. I'm not a massive fan of back paddles, and therefore the default settings is the best for me. However, that is an option you could go for here. But for me, having it on toggle with the default settings is the best way I find. There is a slight disadvantage of having the default setting of leaning, because you have to move left or to the right. You can't activate it from a standstill. So that's a little bit problematic if you're standing behind a very small bit of cover. It might cause you to lean out slightly and expose some of your body. However, generally that doesn't happen and is not really the case in 99% of scenarios. And there's actually an advantage to the default way of leaning, in that having to move slightly to lean is actually making you a moving target, and therefore you're less likely to get killed by a sniper because you're standing still. So yeah, that's actually quite a big benefit of it as well. So that's what I do specifically for leaning. In terms of the control schemes, you can see I've got everything there on default. The one main one here, which people probably would generally change, is the soldier buttons, so the button mapping. I've grown to use and be comfortable and happy with the way it is set up as a default. I would potentially change it if I had back paddles, of which I've tried and I don't like, so I've gone back to using a normal controller. But if you do have the option of back paddles, then obviously customizing that to have buttons on the back, which could be your knife, because some people, don't. I do it all the time. I sometimes knife when I want to lean, because obviously my lean is activated on the right thumbstick. That's the one potential issue that I don't like with the current, layout I use. So I'd potentially put on back paddles if you have the option to knife. You could put on the back paddles leaning. You could put the leaning as the left back paddle, or lean right as the right back paddle. Or of course you could put leaning left or right on one of the back paddles while activating it when moving left or right with the left thumbstick. And of course other people would like to potentially put slide or jump on the back paddles as well, which means you haven't got to take your right thumb off the aiming thumbstick, which is again another big benefit. So for me, default settings all around here. I don't change the mapping of the controller at all, but there is massive benefits there to do it if you have back paddles. Moving on to the advanced controls, we're going to start off, of course, with the aiming left and right acceleration. Now, aim acceleration is an absolute nightmare, and it's probably one of the most important settings that I always will go in any FPS game to see if there is aim acceleration on as default, and instantly turn that off. It absolutely destroys my muscle memory of trying to be consistent with aiming, and it makes it especially hard to be good at long range, which is one of the key things of my gameplay style, and one of my beliefs of doing well in any FPS game, being good at long distance. So it's a nuisance and a nightmare at any distance, but where the best example is, even if you're using a sniper and you're tracking a long distance target, enemy run speed is always fixed at the same speed no matter what. So you're tracking a moving target at long distance, and that enemy speed is always the same. You could put a 10% input on the thumbstick and hold it at 10%, but because of the acceleration, it will just get faster and faster and faster, which a lot of the time, when you're trying to track a target that's the same distance, it's just going to throw your sight that's aiming at the target way off the target. And so it makes it very, very difficult to actually get kills and be consistent that way. Having this off means any input you do on the thumbstick will always be the same, so absolutely perfect for muscle memory. You know, it doesn't need much more explanation than that. I would absolutely say have this off. And one very final important thing actually to say on the aiming left and right acceleration is having this at 0 paired with my low sensitivity. When I'm aiming at a target that's at medium to long distance, especially when sniping and going for moving target headshots, my low sensitivity obviously means I can put massive input on my thumbstick all the way to either side and only get a small amount of movement on the screen. With the way that my sensitivity is set up, my movement or my sensitivity at long distance is slightly faster than the actual max moving sprint speed of targets in this game. So as a result, when tracking a target that's moving at distance, my aim with the thumbstick can be pushed all the way to the side until my thumbstick can't go any further. So I haven't got to try and hold my thumbstick at a sweet spot to make sure it's moving at the right speed for the moving target. I can move my thumbstick 100% of the time, every time, all the way to the side, and I will know 100% that it will be just slightly faster than what the moving target is, allowing me to have a much better chance of hitting headshots. So hopefully that makes sense. Uniform soldier aiming is the next one to talk about, which I've got off. Again, this is a sensitivity based setting. Sensitivity mostly coming down to preference. I've always played the game, for 7 years now with the sensitivity settings which I'd shown on 20% soldier and 80% zoom, along with all the other sensitivity settings that come with it, and it's what I've got used to. I've tried using the uniform soldier aiming on, but I just felt like everything felt highly sensitive and I absolutely hated it. There is some benefit possibly to using it, but I've never spent enough time looking into it or trying to get used to it because I'm at the top of my game using the sensitivity that I've currently got. So to me, I have it off, but leave a comment below if you do use it, why you use it, so that other people might find benefit from it. Moving further down the list of the advanced control settings, we've now got all the different magnification levels, sensitivity settings when aimed down sight, which all in effect are going to be multipliers of your normal standard zoom aim sensitivity, which you've got set in the basic tab, which as I showed you for me is 80%. I pretty much keep this all on default at 100%, which basically just means my sensitivity, no matter whatever gun I'm using, no matter whatever magnification I'm using, will always be the 80%. I basically just do that to maintain consistency and build muscle memory. Therefore, as I said, being consistent whenever I'm playing, whatever map I'm playing, whatever guns I'm using, whatever magnification or scopes I'm using, etc. You could change the higher zoom levels to be more sensitive, because when you're using, for example, a 6x scope on low sensitivity like me, it does move extremely slow at close range, which can be very hard to track a target if you aim in off the target. But to combat that, all I'm basically do is I'll aim out and then turn using the soldier aim sensitivity, which is slightly faster, to then move to the target and aim in. As well as over time, if you've watched any of my sniper 100 kill games, I always, with my practice, I know where the head height is at all times when I'm aiming in, and I always aim in so close to the enemy that even with full max input of the thumbstick, I can drag scope onto the target. So again, in short, keep this on default if you want good muscle memory and consistency in your gameplay. Lastly, in the advanced tab at the bottom, we've got the soldier aim ratio and the soldier zoom aim ratio, which I've got on default at 48% and 80%. So again, this is something I've never changed. I like to keep it simple in that the only things or only settings I change sensitivity wise are the two sliders in the basic tab for the soldier aim and the zoom aim. As soon as you start changing all these different things that all basically just affect one thing, which is sensitivity, you make it extremely complicated and very hard to tweak to be exactly what you want. And it makes it very difficult in the future. If you want to change sensitivities, you've suddenly got to start tweaking 5, 6, 7 different settings just for sensitivity. So I find just keep sensitivity to those two sliders in the basic tab. It'll make it simple and easier for you to tweak and change in the future, especially if on the next Battlefield games or other Battlefield games or other FPS games, you're trying to match the sensitivity you like. You might not be able to do that if you change all these different settings, which other games may not have, because Battlefield is quite good in that it has all these different, options for these different settings. Moving on next to the controller tuning settings, which is going to include things such as vibration and the dead zones on your thumbsticks and the triggers. You can see at the top I've got vibration on. Now, this really doesn't matter to me whether it's on or off, but to some people, if you do want to gain an advantage, having it off would be beneficial because, of course, the vibration of the controller might throw your accuracy or control of the thumbstick off, which therefore makes recoil control harder, could slightly affect your accuracy. However, for me, I like having the vibration on the controller because you can feel the rate of fire of the gun that you're using. You can get a feel as well for the recoil pattern of the gun when you're using it. And it's all just a sensory or feel thing for me. Feeling the vibration, knowing what the recoil pattern is of every time I shoot a bullet, being able to feel it, just helps me with actually controlling the recoil, knowing when to pull down on the thumbstick. It's a very tricky one to explain, as you can tell, but some people like having it off, some people like having it on. I like having it on because I feel like I get better control with it on because I can actually feel the gun that I'm actually using and shooting in the game. Next, we've got the dead zones of the triggers and the thumbsticks, of which you can see the only default values which I've changed are going to be the center dead zones on the thumbsticks, changing them from 15% to 10%, as well as on the triggers, you can see the dead zones I've changed to 0%. I will go and talk about the dead zones first on the triggers. I've changed that to 0 because I want input to happen as soon as I press the trigger. I don't want to have to pull the trigger down a quarter of the way or halfway to then see a bullet get fired. Having this at 0 allows you to shoot the bullets from your gun faster or exactly when you want it to, which again will give you an advantage in gunfights to make sure you land that first bullet on the target faster than your enemy will hit one on you. In terms of the dead zones then, on the thumbsticks, of course, I've changed the center dead zone from 15% to 10%. Now, center dead zone is always a tricky one. It depends, if you're playing on a TV or a monitor with a very fast response time, what setting you want to go with here. And of course, setting too low of a center dead zone will highlight the issues or problems you might have with your controller thumbsticks if they've got stick drift. So some people like going down to 6 or 7%, which allows it to be max responsiveness. However, you'll be replacing controllers every few weeks. Maybe not that fast, but you will certainly be replacing controllers a lot faster if you play on 6 or 7%, which can also then make the game unplayable and you'll be at more of a disadvantage playing with stick drift than if you're playing without stick drift, but with a slightly higher dead zone. But I do find that 15% for the dead zone is slightly too high, and you can get a bit more responsiveness, which helps with when pairing it up with sensitivity levels to just drop it down to 10%, and it's kind of in the middle, which is what I like. So you're not replacing controllers so often, but you've got slightly more responsive than the average default player. Okay, so let's move on to the gameplay settings, but the first thing here that's important to talk about, which is going to be the chat log. And you can see here I've got hide, so therefore it is hidden. Now, the chat log is a very large box that blocks the top left corner of your screen. And again, I like to minimize the HUD as much as I possibly can of all the non-essential stuff, so that I can make sure my focus is always on enemies that, or moving targets that are on the screen. Looking away from the actual game itself and looking for enemies for just a split second is enough for an enemy to pop up on the screen or come around a corner and get a kill on you. Ask yourself, do you really need to see the chat log? Not really. Yes, you can see when a teammate is asking for meds or other stuff like that, or ammo, but you can also see on the minimap the actual flashing icon when someone requests it as well. So you're not losing out on the ability to see when your teammates need certain things. And if you're going to request and ask for stuff yourself, you don't need to see it pop up in the top left where you've requested it. Everybody else can see it anyway. So chat log, really, it's not needed. Now, the next thing to talk about is going to be the kill log. And it's one of the main things I always get asked about during my live streams, why I have the kill log turned off. Now, it can be very useful in that it can show you, obviously, player names and the weapons that they're using. And you can even change it so it's set up so that it shows you actual enemies that are nearby. The main reasons why I have it turned off, firstly, like the chat log, it's blocking a small part of the screen, which blocks your visibility. Second of all, it's, when you've got to look at it for a few seconds, it's a distraction, which is enough time for an enemy to pop up on screen, come around a corner, and get you killed. And thirdly, I don't want to be impacted because, like most people, probably like yourself, you'll look at the scoreboard, you'll look at the enemy team, and you'll see what the best players are in the game, what the highest level players are, because you'll either want to compete for kills, you'll want to do better than them, all these different factors, but you'll look at the best players on the enemy team, and it will have an impact on you. And how it has an impact on you is that if you've got it set up to show you nearby kills and therefore the nearby players, if you know that one of the really high skilled, high level players is close by, in your brain, you're going to be telling yourself, oh, I need to be more careful here. I don't want to run around this corner too fast because there's a high-skilled player. I need to be ready to kill them. You might go from playing aggressive to playing defensive or being overcautious. If you've got it turned off, you're never going to see if those high-skilled players are there or not. You'll run around as normal. You won't change your play style. You'll play the way you want to play consistently, and you'll go into every single gunfight as if the player, or you'll go into the same gunfight every single time the way you want to. You won't change the way that you're going into gunfights because there's a potential good player there or not. So, and that's what I find is a key thing to doing well throughout the course of a game, is treating every player as if they're the same level. Of course, every gunfight is going to be different. However, if you change the way you play, then you're going to affect yourself and lower your chances of actually winning gunfights and staying alive or doing well across the course of a game. So it's a bit of a mental one, the kill log, but that's what I do, so I have it turned off. Moving further down on the gameplay settings, we come to the section which basically covers all the different crosshair and hit indicator customization, and basically whatever sorts of colors you want to have for these things. I've got obviously the default colors. I've never really wanted to change it or care to change it. I don't really like having wacky colors like you see some people will have green or purple, whatever it be. There is a potential benefit here if you do change them to other colors. You know, the standard white crosshairs might not be very visible on snow maps such as Narvik or Fjell, which might mean when you're coming into a close range gunfight and going for hip fire, you might miss a few bullets, which will lower your accuracy because you've got a white crosshair which blends in with the background of the map. So there's potential there to change it and improve in that sense. However, I've not taken that benefit because I don't want to use wacky colors just for the sake of me not wanting to use wacky colors. But yeah, otherwise, nothing else really changed here. Crosshair visibility obviously on 100%, along with any other sights, whatever it be, just to make sure you can actually see and know what you're shooting at. Moving further down again, you've got my minimap settings there and default icon opacity settings, which are basically default. And as you could see, as I come down to the final part at the bottom there of the gameplay settings, the only main key thing here, which I would talk about, is I've got on 0% the objective icon opacity when you're aimed down sight. So in effect, when you're aimed down sight, none of the flags, for example, when you're playing Conquest, are going to pop up large on your screen and are obviously going to be a distraction and block you from potentially being able to see enemies and identify enemies while you're aimed down sight, but also actually block your view while aiming down sight trying to kill someone. So that's why I've got that on 0. You know, you can see all the flags when you're running around when you're not aimed down sight, so I absolutely see no reason to have that on any higher. Yes, you could aim in to ping an objective, but it's easy enough to do that from hip fire. So or simply, you know, holding down your bumper and selecting the flag that way. So yeah, that's the main last key setting there on the basic gameplay settings. Okay, so advanced gameplay settings is where we're going to get some like juicy topics, I guess. Starting off there, camera shake scale at the top, put down to the lowest it possibly can be, which is 50%. Again, you just don't want, when explosions are going off or a V1 rocket hits, whatever, your screen to be shaking like crazy, and it affects you from being able to see and identify enemies, to be able to react fast, to actually shoot them in a gunfight, but also as well affecting your accuracy because the screen's obviously shaking around. So that's just common sense, putting that one down to 50%. The next things there are going to be the auto leaning and the auto peak. Auto peak is fine to have on, you know, when you're behind a piece of cover, being able to just press the aim down sight button on your bumper, your trigger, whatever you use it as, to quickly pop up from behind cover. It's very useful because you don't pop up as far as you would if you were just crouched behind that piece of cover. And obviously, as soon as you aim out then and take your finger off the trigger, you pop super fast down behind cover. Auto leaning is the more controversial one because in effect it sometimes or often will activate when you don't want it to. So you might want to pre-aim behind cover before popping out from behind cover, but it'll activate when you don't want it to. However, the benefit of it is once you've got used to it and you obviously you're used to going behind loads of different types of objects of cover and you know how to activate it properly, you can avoid that issue of it activating when you don't want it to and learn how to use it to very quickly pop in and out of cover, and it can actually save your life. And it's a lot faster than having to use the default method of using the thumbsticks to activate the leaning left or right. So if you can get used to it, it's very useful to have the auto lean on. Otherwise, simply just have it off, but it's not a massive thing to have on or off. Next, we've got the aim assists. So here, specifically talking about the soldier aim assist and the zoom snap aim assist, which as you can see, I've got on default, which is both at 100%. Now, it obviously is one of the more controversial settings. You'll get a lot of the experienced players, competitive players, pro players, whatever term you want to use, who, you know, one of their arguments is that having 0 on these aim assists, or certainly lowering it, is more advantageous than having, you know, high aim assist, because rather than aiming in, snapping straight onto the chest, you can actually aim for the head, which can get you kills a lot faster. Obviously, the issue is you have to be really good, play countless hours non-stop to be consistent and to maintain that really high accuracy of hitting headshots every time you aim in and go into a gunfight, which obviously that's not something that's easy to do for anyone consistently all of the time, and you will end up getting killed in stupid scenarios because you haven't aimed in correctly for whatever reason it is. So that's one of the main arguments that people will have for having it low or even on 0. My argument for having it on 100% simply is that every other person, or rather 90+%, 95+% of people are high level, high skilled players who play thousands of hours, and they're all going to be on default settings using 100%. So even if you're a high skilled player who's playing on 0, you can come up against a level 1 enemy who's playing their first game, you run around a corner, and that level 1 enemy can literally snap straight onto your chest and is therefore going to be guaranteed straight away to hit the 3 to 4 bullets, whatever it is they need, with this sten, if that's what they're starting with, to get the kill on you. And you, as the experienced player on 0 aim assist, have to make sure you aim in directly on their head as well, or even their chest. So there's a lot of margin for error by having it on 0, and you give a lot of chance to the low level, low skilled players to actually kill you if you mess up. So there's a lot of risk and reward in having 0. If the majority of people by default are going to have 100%, you might as well use it yourself and maintain the highest accuracy and highest consistency possible of just getting aimed straight onto the target, and obviously utilizing the aim assist. Obviously, if the Battlefield devs in the next game, or even in this game when it was made, did an update which changed it so that aim assist was lowered, or even was completely taken away on console, whatever it be, we're not going to complain. I'm not going to complain. I'll simply just practice without it and get good without it. But if the option is there and as default to have 100%, you might as well use it, because 90+% of the other players are, and I think it puts you at a disadvantage to not use it. So that's my take there on the aim assists. The only main disadvantage I would say with the aim assist happens when I'm sniping, simply because you'll aim down your sights at a target, another enemy will run across the screen, across the front of the enemy you actually want to shoot at, and it'll drag your scope away. However, in terms of going for headshots on moving targets, it slowing down as you're coming past the head of the enemy basically slows it down at the perfect time to get a moving headshot. So there's positives and negatives, but if everybody else can use it, you might as well use it. There are the network performance settings if interested, but let's get on to the audio settings. You can see the master volume I've got set at 60%, therefore lowering this down from the default. I've not got any sort of issue here with the master volume in terms of if you want to turn it down or up. You can actually change the volume just by simply changing the volume of your headset if you're on PlayStation 5. However, I have lowered this down over time simply because the game is too loud and it actually is giving me hearing problems. I am starting to get tinnitus, not just from gaming and playing with it too loud, but all sorts of other things in my life, where whether it's listening to music or even in university years ago and going out and partying, and obviously loud music in clubs and stuff like that. So I am naturally now, as I'm getting older, although I'm not very old at 25, slowly lowering down the master volume. So all I would recommend to you here is put your health first and actually lower the volume down slightly, because you don't need it as loud as you think. Even if you lower it down, your ears will adjust to the sound and it'll still sound as loud as it was before once you adjust to it. It'll just take an hour or two once you change it, where it won't feel right because it's not as loud as normal, before your ears adjust, and then you can sort of pick up those same low sounds. Music volume, of course, there is at 0%. There's nothing more annoying for me than having the music at the start and end of the round, where, you know, especially at the end of the round, where you're rushing to try and get those final few kills or trying to secure that final flag to get the win, and you get killed by enemies that are so close by because you can't hear their footsteps. So, you know, definitely I would say turn that down to 0. The headset or sound preset I've got as 3D headphones. That's the one I've always used since the beginning of Battlefield 5, since the beta. That's always worked the best for me, but if you have watched any of my recent streams over the last few months, I have struggled a bit to identify the footsteps. I think there might have been some change in the game when the antivirus, if that's what we call it, or anti-hacking update was added. And I don't even know if that update was for just for PC or had any impact on console. But one issue I have noticed in the last 6 months, last year, is you do often get, you know, those first games which you join, your teammates' footsteps are incredibly loud while the enemies is very quiet. And then after you get through that first game, it starts to go back to normal. So 3D headphones is the best, which I've found. But if you have got a better one, then do let me know, because that's probably one of the main things in my settings which I would go and change myself as well. And I do know that PS5 or PlayStation has introduced a setting you can turn on in the settings of the console, which can improve the audio for you, although I've not tested that yet. So that's definitely something which I would look into and suggest for you to do if you're on PlayStation, as well as if there's any similar settings on Xbox or PC. Otherwise, as you can see, there's nothing else significant there underneath the sound preset which you need to change. And lastly, let's have a look at the video settings. Again, not a lot of settings here to go through. Brightness, I've always had on 60%. I found that to be the perfect combination between the bright maps, which will typically be maps like Narvik and Fjell, where you've got white snow and the sun or the light bounces off it and it is quite bright. I'd say even 60% might be a bit too much for the snow maps, although I hardly ever play the snow maps. But 60% works really good for all the other maps I find. So that's what I go with there for the brightness. Field of view, crazy. I know some of you are going to say that's crazy, being on 55, which is the default. Again, joining to my argument at the start of the video with my on sensitivity settings, whereby I believe in obviously having really good ability at long range, because Battlefield has really large maps. 55 FOV. I have got a video you can search up, high versus low, which goes into pretty much all the different details. But in short, I like 55. I like having things bigger on the screen. Obviously, the enemies or anything that's moving on screen looks like it moves a lot slower, even though it is exactly the same. But the fact that it does move slower gives you more time to react, because you'll see those bigger things moving earlier than you would if it's a long distance target that's like the size of an ant, because you're playing on extremely high FOV. So that that's ultimately the main reason. Better reaction times and spotting and identifying things a lot faster at all ranges. Again, FOV is something which you can change depending on your play style. A lot of aggressive players like having a really high FOV, especially for maps like Armage and Underground. But my opinion is you don't need to really have a high FOV and see a lot to the sides, because Underground's such a linear map. Even on 55, I've got a wall on my left and to my right which I can see on the screen most of the time. So it's not like I'm going to miss out seeing something on the sides on those small maps which players want to play aggressive on. Lastly, in terms of the other settings that are there on screen, motion blur I've got down to 0%, the same as the camera shake, just to improve your visibility. Don't add anything or have anything on which could impact your visibility and therefore reaction times to spotting enemies and possibly accuracy while in a gunfight. Hence why I've also got off all the different things on the bottom there. So the chromatic aberration, film grain, VigNet, and the lens distortion. So yeah, pretty much having all those things there off. But yeah, that's pretty much my settings as it is finally for Battlefield 5. I am going to try and replicate this for Battlefield 6 as best as I can with whatever settings are available. I know it's been a 40-minute video now at this point. However, I don't want this video to be, I don't believe in settings videos being someone just doing a couple of minute video, literally just scrolling through their settings. People go to settings because they want to know what people use and why, even if it's not the best. They want an explanation of why, good players, if you can class me as a good player, why they use certain settings. But hopefully it's been helpful. And yeah, smash a like, and I'll see you on the next video.